I'm pleased to be joined by the longtime Vice Chairman and Treasurer of Carnegie Hall, who currently also serves as the Acting Executive Director, Klaus Jacobs. Welcome to CityWide. So Carnegie Hall is going to be the only performing arts venue that I know of that has its own joke. And how did Carnegie Hall come to be Carnegie Hall?
Well, it has a long history. As you know, Andrew Carnegie built the hall, paid for the hall. It opened in 1891, actually, on the 5th of May. And it was from the first day conceived by Andrew Carnegie as what is today called a performing arts center. It had 3 halls, a large main hall with over 2,800 seats, a medium-sized, what I call today a chamber music hall, and a small recital hall. So something which has been very unusual at that time and was really a proof of his long-term thinking and the great ideas he had in the first place.
Did it fill some kind of social niche? Were there other places where culture could be celebrated in that way in New York City at that time?
I think at that time there was very little in New York. I think the Metropolitan Opera House existed, but there was no concert hall of that size. And when he built it on 57th Street, which at that time was really considered very out of the way and in the north, and there was still sheep grazing on 57th Street, is a very, very unusual step.
What about the acoustics of the halls themselves? Is there anything special about the building?
We know who was the architect. We don't know who and even whether there was an acoustician at that time. But the acoustics of the main hall, today known as the Isaac Stern Auditorium, are warm, wonderful, and every artist, every orchestra just loves it.
It has an iconic status. You almost compare it to the Mona Lisa. It's hard to say whether the Mona Lisa anymore is a great piece of art because it's so culturally imprinted on all of us, so famous. Does that celebrity impose particular burdens on the artists who perform at Carnegie Hall?
Yes, I think it imposes a lot of burdens on us who manage the hall, because we feel that we have to present the best in every genre of music there exists, be it in classical music, be it in contemporary classical music, be it in jazz or in world music or in popular music. And that is certainly an obligation which we have.
And you also have to pick things that are going to draw audiences.
It's very much the combination of being able to present a challenging and artistic challenging program and fill the hall.
Now, there was a point in time where the future of Carnegie Hall seemed somewhat bleak, and the property itself was at risk. When was that, and how did the building get saved?
It was in 1925, about 6 years after Andrew Carnegie died, that Mrs. Carnegie sold the building. Until that time, the family owned it. She sold it to a real estate developer in the city, and he kept it. And I think it was his son who put it up for sale in 1955. And that is when there was a danger that Carnegie would be demolished, and actually a demolition date was set for 1961, and it was only due to the last-minute effort of Isaac Stern and a group of very loyal friends that the hall was saved.
And it was purchased by them, or?
No, by special legislation, the city of New York purchased the building for $5 million in 1961.
So it's now owned by the city, but operated by a not-for-profit organization?
That is correct. The city owns the building. At that time, also a Carnegie Hall Corporation was created, a non-for-profit. And the Carnegie Hall Corporation leases the building from the city and operates and manages it.
What does the city of New York get out of having Carnegie Hall?
I think in New York, to have what the New York Times once called, after our renovation in 1986, America's premier music hall, a hall which presents about 750 events today in its 3 venues. Among that, I think the best of the best in every genre, as I said before. And I think by doing that, Carnegie Hall substantially contributes to the economic success of New York City.
For a major classical performance of some kind, what's the profile of the audience? Are they New Yorkers? Are they foreign visitors? Where do they come from?
I think that the bulk of our audience, particularly for classical music, comes from New York City, from all 5 boroughs. To some extent, they come from the larger metropolitan area. And there are some, what I call tourists, but I think tourists in Carnegie Hall is a very small number. That is different, for example, to the Metropolitan Opera or to Broadway.
Are most of your seats held by season ticket holders? Do you have subscriptions?
We have subscriptions, and right now we are selling about 2/3 of our tickets on subscription.
There was an article in the New York Times perhaps a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, that suggested that orchestral music itself was an anachronism, that there were certain audiences that enjoyed it either as a social status or as a nostalgia experience, and that when newer pieces were introduced, the traditional bass audience was alienated, that it filled a social niche in the 19th century that was no longer relevant to contemporary times. What is your take on that? Is there a future for orchestral music, or is it really an anachronism?
I think there's very much a future for orchestral concerts, and I think the fact that we are selling these concerts very well is a proof of that. There's also been a talk about the aging audiences for orchestral or classical music, and I must tell you, we at Carnegie Hall do not agree with that. The audiences for the standard classical repertoire always has been and is in its early 50s, and that hasn't changed, at least not to our knowledge in Carnegie Hall. Some people disappear, younger people come in. You touched about contemporary music. Yes, some of the older audiences do not like it that much, but I think this is also an education process, and we present contemporary music in combination with the standard classical programming, and it is received very well.
There's also been a suggestion that because of the digital age, that there's a flight to quality, in the sense that you can enjoy the top artists digitally, CD or whatever on television, and therefore, not so much in Carnegie Hall, but in the rest of the country, you won't attract audiences to anything less than the celebrity performers. Now, do you sense that as you talk to your colleagues around the country as to how the general audience is shaping up?
I don't think so. I think there is still a big difference between experiencing a concert live in a great concert hall, or listening to a CD, or even watching a DVD at home.
And what about an audience that has a choice between seeing the New York Philharmonic or the Brooklyn Philharmonic, which may be a fine orchestra, but isn't necessarily as well known, or doesn't command the star soloist the way the New York Philharmonic can?
I think all of these orchestras have their audiences, have their enthusiastic audiences, and fill the halls.
It's not easy to expand in a place like New York, particularly because of the space limitations, but many organizations feel that they have to grow or they'll start to deteriorate. Carnegie Hall came up with a rather innovative way of growing in a very densely congested area. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we actually made use of a space which was originally conceived and built by Andrew Carnegie, namely the mid-sized chamber music hall, which is located right under the large Isaac Stern Auditorium. That hall was leased to a cinema for many, many, many years, and the lease came up in 1998, if I'm not mistaken. And we at Carnegie Hall decided to use the opportunity to recapture the space. It was the then executive director, Judith Ern, who came up with the idea to expand the space and build a chamber music hall, which we have done. Started in 1999. We opened in September last year, in September 2003, what is known today as the Judy and Arthur Zankel Hall. And indeed, it's a fascinating hall. We had to dig about 30 feet into the rock of Manhattan to enlarge the space to be able to build a modern hall. It is a flexible hall. It can be configured in flat floor, in a traditional raked seating, in amphitheater seating with a center stage, with end stage. We even can create an orchestra pit. It has all the technical installations for transmitting the concerts by the most modern equipment. And so it has become, for us, a huge success, and we are very happy to have it.
CityWide will continue right after this.
There is really only one boy, one girl, one tree, one forest, one ocean, one mountain, one sky, and one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups are working together under one name, EarthShare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Klaus Jacobs, the Vice Chairman and Treasurer of Carnegie Hall, who's currently also serving as the Acting Executive Director. We were talking about the new space that was literally dug out of bedrock. Does having a variety of venues within the venue give you the opportunity to experiment with the kind of music that is performed at Carnegie Hall?
Very much so. I think Zankel Hall, with 600 seating, is a very good example of it. And if you look at our programming today, then you will see that in Zankel Hall we do present performances which we were not able and couldn't do in the past and didn't do in the past. And that includes, for example, world music. It includes jazz. It includes popular music. And very much it is used for education.
Tell us about the educational programs.
Education is a very important part in what we at the board level of Carnegie Hall consider our mission. And you may be interested to know that on a net basis, we are spending as much money on education as we are spending on presenting music. Education today comes under the umbrella of the Weill Music Institute. And it ranges, we address audiences from preschool kids to adults. And we do teacher training, which is very important. We do education for high school, for elementary school, for preschool kids. We do professional training workshops where great artists give master classes, and we do adult programs. And you know, if you take it all together, I think on an annual basis we address over 100,000 individuals directly with our programs.
And opportunities for young people to actually do recitals, I think.
Very much so. Much of that we do in Zankel Hall, but we also do it in the Weill Recital Hall, which is the smallest hall of all, with an audience of 268 people. We have a series called Distinctive Debuts, where we present young people, and for them it's a first chance to play in Carnegie Hall. And it's a milestone normally in their lives.
Speaking of first chances, I was looking over some of the history, and of course the hall has a great tradition of having contemporary artists, popular artists appear right up to the Beatles. But I couldn't help but notice that one of the performers in the 1940s was Duke Ellington, who premiered a work there. And that was at a time when African-American, and particularly African-American artists, weren't welcome in big parts of New York City, as strange as it may seem today, let alone in the rest of America. Could you talk a little bit about the hall's openness to those types of experiences?
Well, it was in 1912, actually, that Carnegie Hall had the first jazz concert presenting, of course, African-American artists. Marian Anderson first sang at Carnegie Hall, not at the Met. And indeed, you're talking about the concert, which actually was a New York premiere of Duke Ellington's work, Black, Brown and Beige, in 1946. But long before, I think all greats of the jazz world played at Carnegie. Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie and Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday, everybody was there.
Was there any backlash against it? And
I don't think so. Carnegie Hall always considered itself on the forefront of musical presentations, and new music always was a very, very important part of Carnegie Hall. 1928, an American in Paris of Gershwin was world premiered at Carnegie Hall.
you also have a great tradition of public lectures, of public figures, presidents, writers, even Lenny Bruce, Albert Einstein and Lenny Bruce. Appearing there. Where does that fit into the mission, and what kind of audiences do you get for those? How do you even pick who you're going to allow to just give a talk?
Well, I mean, there was a long tradition at Carnegie Hall for lectures, for speakers. You mentioned some. Presidents spoke at Carnegie Hall. Mark Twain spoke at Carnegie Hall. And this tradition continues. We have occasionally very interesting speakers at Carnegie Hall, and even today in the musical world, we do talks with artists where not necessarily music is performed, but our current composer in residence, John Adams, has a program which we call Works in Progress, where he enters into discussions with important artists from other genres but music. Last year he had a very successful long discussion with Frank Gehry, or with Peter Sellers, the stage director, or Bill Viola, the video artist. And those are fascinating additions to our regular concert programs. So
take me inside the back office. How big is the budget? How many people work there?
We have about a $70 million annual budget. The staff is about 135 to 140 in the administration. We have about the same number who are unionized employees, and that includes ushers and stagehands and painters and electricians and carpenters. So the total staff is close to 300 people.
And what's your typical day like?
My typical day is working with the staff on a variety of projects which we pursue, primarily in the area of artistic planning, in the area of planning our educational projects, working with marketing in developing marketing programs and selling tickets, preparing for board meetings, looking over our financial results, working with the controller and the finance director. So it's a full day, and which is the great part of my current job, is going to concerts in the evening.
You get to go to any concert that you want.
I will, and I will go to every concert. I generally attend every concert.
Organizations like yours depend very heavily on fundraising, and that takes a variety of forms. Some years ago, I had the good fortune to go to one of the dinners. It may even have been in conjunction with the centennial, I'm not sure, but I think that there were enough there was enough jewelry in that room to have paid off the national debt. And not all of the contributors, as best as I could tell, were New Yorkers. It seemed to be a national base of people. Why do people give money to Carnegie Hall?
I think because they either love music or, in our case, have a specific interest in music education. And fundraising, of course, for us is a very, very important part. We cover approximately 35+% of our budget through annual fundraising. That does not include the monies we have raised in the past for endowment and for capital projects such as Zankel Hall. And our annual fundraising is roughly in the $23–24 million range.
What would you say the biggest problem is that you're facing these days, or the biggest challenge?
Certainly the economic difficulties after 9/11 have hurt a little bit. We have done comparatively well. Fundraising is always a challenge, there's no question about it, because there are so many good causes to be supported.
And is there an electronic component to the future? In other words, obviously the acoustics of the hall, the experience of the live musical performance is something that is truly unique to Carnegie Hall, but the brand also has power, and the ability to broadcast or use the internet as a vehicle for reaching a larger audience. Is that part of Carnegie Hall's future? That
is certainly part of our future. We are looking into it very actively. Of course, there are lots of rights issues involved in distributing our performances on the internet, as everybody knows. But I give you another example. That's our distance learning program, which we have. In Zankel Hall, we have all the equipment to connect ourselves with the world. And every year we have several programs where we are connected. Last year was a very fascinating program where we had live connection with South Africa, with Johannesburg. On one hand, in Johannesburg, you had a choir of 300 kids. On our side, we had a choir of 300 kids. The hall was full with about 500 people, and it was on time with Hugh Masekela, the great South African jazz trumpeter, and a program here at Carnegie Hall. It was a huge success, and it was really very moving. And I think for the kids who attended, it was a great, great day.
So a great history and a great future. My thanks to Klaus Jacobs, the Vice Chairman and Treasurer of Carnegie Hall. That's all for this edition of CityWide. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us.